Humanity is innumerable, spread across the stars, with a military might befitting a galaxy-spanning empire like the Imperium. And yet, for all their numbers, there are a few individuals within humanity, or those who are ascended beyond it, who have become renowned even beyond their peers. In this series of logs, we shall take a look at some of those Adeptus Astartes of particular legend in this modern era, known collectively as the Champions of Humanity. Today, we look at an individual who, according to the Primarch he fights and studies under, is an echo of or throwback to a legend of his chapter when it was still a legion. Said to be heir to the role of chapter master, despite the fact he isn't officially at the front of the queue, he is the one tasked by title with overseeing infractions against their honour both within and without. Hailing from the planet of Talassar in Ultramar, he is the Grand Duke of his homeworld, the Knight Champion of Macragge, and the High Suzerain of Ultramar. He is believed to be the second company captain of the Ultramarines, and his name is Cato Sicarius. This is Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to Champions of Humanity, a 40k Stories miniseries. Cato Sicarius was born on the ocean world of Talassar within the Ultramar Empire, pretty much straight west of Macragge itself, but quite far from the Ultramarines' homeworld relative to some other planets. We lack dates for his birth, unfortunately, but it was probably at least 300 years before the end of M41. His family was a noble one, being one of the most notable families in all of Ultramar, in fact, but he did not use his presumably affluent surroundings lazily. Training and education began for Cato at a very young age, with a heavy martial focus. Some say that by the time he was 4, he was able to shoot and wield a sword to an acceptable level for his tutors. Presumably, the family and said tutors could already sense that Sicarius was destined for greatness, though whether it was his benefit or theirs, given the seemingly feudal and intrigue-filled system of Ultramar, is unclear. But either way, he flourished under their study. Either the Ultramarines came calling on their recruitment drives, or when he came of age, Cato travelled or was taken to the place where volunteers go to try and join the chapter. Exactly who assessed him and how is unclear, but the training on Talassar obviously paid dividends, and Sicarius was accepted into the ranks of the Ultramarine Scout Company. Though he had received intellectual training before that helped keep his mind sharp, it was his martial side that was allowed to flourish further amongst the sons of Guilliman. Although once again we lack dates, it is said he progressed relatively quickly through the ranks. Following his time as a scout, it is believed that Sicarius joined and then rose through the 8th Company, meaning he would have spent many of his early days with a jump pack on his back. He served in an assault squad, potentially as a sergeant, in the Damocles Gulf Crusade against the Tau in around 740 M41, with one of his squad mates being Numitor, who is the 8th Company's captain today. Though his actions against the greater good are unknown, he is believed to have been zealous and uncompromising with the members of the Astra Militarum who are also part of the Crusade. Retreat didn't seem to be a very valid concept to Sicarius, who would execute those guardsmen who did so during the battles. However, this was not the first time that Cato Sicarius' name appears in Ultramarines history. Almost a decade prior to Damocles, he was awarded the Imperial Laurel for his actions in an otherwise unknown battle called the Crusat Minor Planet Strike. This shows that even this early in his career, Sicarius was one to watch, as the laurel symbolises a great deed performed and great valour displayed whilst doing it. Following Damocles, it is rather hard to keep tabs on exactly where and when Sicarius served in various companies of the Ultramarines, as he seems to have hopped all over the place before rising higher in the command chain. However, he did all of this jumping around pretty damn fast. There is suggestion that he has been company champion of the 4th, 2nd, and 1st Company on separate occasions before becoming captain of the 5th Company by the time of the Battle for Macragge. Given Damocles started in 742 M41 and the battles with High Fleet Behemoth were at latest at 746 M41, this means that Sicarius jumped from his squad in the 8th to being a high-ranking member of 3 separate companies before being commanding a 4th in the span of at most 4 years. The best way I can justify this, and I admit I have to stretch for it, is his role as Knight Champion of Macragge that I believe he received before the Tyranids showed up. This role seems to be something akin to the role of chapter champion, as it falls to Sicarius to answer any challenges made to the Ultramarines and not necessarily just on the battlefield. If this role allowed him to move across companies to answer these challenges, it would explain why he was the guardian and champion of 3 separate captains in such a short space of time. As I say, I'm kind of stretching to make it all fit, but it's the best I can do. However, it does all fit together. Sicarius was in command of 5th Company when the Ultramarines almost lost their home to the oncoming High Fleet Behemoth. Though he is not stated as being involved personally in the battle, it is possible he was, as elements of the 5th joined Marnius Calgar in the battles of Cold Steel Ridge or thereabouts. Even if he wasn't alongside his chapter master, he had clearly done enough to win favour with the other commanders and the Lord Macragge himself, as evidenced when Behemoth was eventually defeated. 1st Captain Saul Invictus, whom Sicarius had been champion for at one time, died along with the rest of his company in the northern polar fortresses of Macragge. Perhaps by tradition or by election, his place was taken by the captain of the 2nd Company, an individual known as Severus Agaman, who still holds the post today. With the 2nd Company's captaincy now vacant, it was Cato Sicarius who would be promoted to the role and gain the rank of Master of the Watch, from which his tale, and some would say his legend, would continue to grow. The first battle of the 2nd Company under Cato Sicarius was the Dantaro campaign, which I assume to be within the region of Ultramar itself due to the scouring/cleanup undertaken by the Ultramarines post-Behemoth. Sadly, all details of this battle are lost save its name, and though Sicarius won great renown in many wars, it is impossible to date the majority of them. On the planet of Masali, a key world of Ultramar, Sicarius is known to have shown the great potential of the Land Raider Prometheus command tank against Eldari pirates, winning the marksman's honour for excellent accuracy in the process. This may have been part of the Ultramar cleanup given the location of Masali, but without dates it's hard to say for sure. In fact, the next time I can actually put a date on a battle or event involving Cato Sicarius is in 849 M41, when he was awarded the title of High Suzerain of Ultramar. As the title suggests, this position gave Sicarius a measure of control over Ultramar himself. This is perhaps no surprise though, given he was the 3rd most powerful Ultramarine by rank at the time, but it will have put his intellectual training on Talazar to the test, I would suspect. There must be a little bit of diplomacy involved with that job. He would also become the Grand Duke of his homeworld at some point, effectively making him a planetary governor alongside everything else. But I doubt he spends much time at home given the amount of battles the life of a Space Marine demands. Sicarius is next dated as appearing in 855 M41 on the high world Black Reach in southern Ultima Segmentum. Here, he and his 2nd Company fought against the invasion of the Orc war boss Zanzag, whose massive war had already taken 3/4 of the planet's hives by the time Sicarius arrived. Despite this, Zanzag seemed to be nowhere to be found, leaving Sicarius to help defend the hive still in human hands without making much progress. In the end, it fell to the 10th Company captain under Scout Sergeant Tellian, who may well have trained Sicarius given he trained 4 of the pre-Primaris captains of the chapter, to hunt the war boss down, which they eventually did by tracking an Orc submersible to the base of operations. Acting swiftly, the Ultramarines struck the Orcs in their cavernous base and caught them pretty much unawares. It is unconfirmed whether Sicarius was the one to actually take Zanzag down, but the war boss fell in the fighting regardless of who struck the fatal blow, and his war collapsed within days afterwards. Not too long after, in 878 M41, an old enemy of the Ultramarines would run into Sicarius for the first time, as the demon prince Umkar crossed his path in the Halamar Rift. This battle was entirely fought in space and on board the vessels of both sides, and the Ultramarines won out rather clearly, truth be told. Sicarius led a boarding action against Umkar's vessel, but was unable to banish or slay the demon prince before his forces retreated into the warp. After that, things get hazy in terms of dates once again, but it would be in 946 M41 that we get concrete placement of Sicarius on a battlefield. Taking place on the shrine world of Adelim in Ultima Segmentum, this battle pitted the Ultramarines against the forces of Chaos, led by the word-bearer demon prince Cor Megron, who had actually conquered the world all the way back in the Great Crusade for the Imperium. Sicarius and the Ultramarines were diverted to Adolin from battles against the Tau, arriving to try and reinforce the valiant but struggling defenders. The major battle, from which the overall war takes its name, took place at the Eagle Gate on the outer walls of the planetary capital. Though the Imperials were still forced back for a while by the massive Chaos Horde, the tide had already started to turn as Cormegron and Sicarius came face to face. In a parody of the fateful duel between Horus and the Emperor millennia before, Megron had Sicarius beat, but was distracted for a second by a lone guardsman attacking him. This distracted the Demon Prince just long enough for the second captain to take advantage, banishing Cormegron and sending the Word Bearers and then the rest of the Chaos forces into retreat. Following Adolin, things start happening a bit faster, and we get a clearer picture of Sicarius' travels and deeds. In 969 M41, he would be something of an uninvited participant in a war that in the eyes of some, he had no business getting involved in. The Imperial Fist Captain Lysander and the Iron Warriors Warsmith Shontu were in the midst of a blood feud we've discussed before in this series of logs, but when they clashed on the manufactorial world of Taladorn, the Blood Angels under Captain Tycho and the Ultramarines under Sicarius were caught up too. The Fists were first to make planetfall, though the others were actually in system first, and with two masterminds like Sicarius and Tycho, the battle in space was won relatively easily. However, when Sicarius offered to aid Lysander and co, the captain refused angrily, but when the Fists began to lose and suffer heavy losses, the offer was accepted by Sergeant Tor Garadon. The Ultramarines teleported down despite the roaring disapproval of Lysander, and the day was won even though Shontu escaped, and Lysander blamed Sicarius for that. Lysander would not make the same mistake 2 years later, when Shontu rose up again on his former world of Maladrax, inviting both Sicarius and Tycho to join in the vengeance alongside the rest of the Imperial Fists. Sicarius' forces joined the boarding action on Shontu's titanic flagship Tamunash, helping to sever the umbilical cords that helped keep the vessel in top condition. They did their job well, allowing the Fist to strike at Shontu directly before disabling weapons to allow for an exit, and assumedly any slighted honour from Taladorn was put aside in the aftermath as Maladrax burned in the fires of Exterminatus. Though I am sure he saw defeats in other theatres before, one of the first major defeats for Sicarius came in a battle simply known as the Damnos Incident. This battle took place on the mining world of Damnos in the Vidar sector, a region of Ultima Segmentum that seems to be littered with tomb worlds. In 973 M41, Damnos revealed itself to be another Necron-held world, as the legions of an overlord known as the Undying arose to take back the planet. By the time the Ultramarines, including Sicarius and Chief Librarian Tigurius, arrived, the planet was almost lost already, with only one city and its spaceport truly remaining in Imperial hands. His strike cruiser was forced to break orbit due to surface weapons fire that had already claimed a Navy battleship, but a drop pod assault was launched with a fair measure of success. Tigurius' cohort completed their objective, and Sicarius' forces were able to push the Necrons back, despite landing in a bad spot, and despite the Necron Lord gravely wounding the captain. This injury was so severe that it effectively took Sicarius out of the picture for the rest of the campaign, as Tigurius and the Tech Marines decided the city could not be held, and that Damnos must be evacuated. They succeeded in this, but half of Second Company lay dead, and the planet was of course lost. Sicarius' injuries kept him away from fighting for months, but eventually he was back in the saddle. Admittedly, we don't know exactly where he went after his recovery, as he next appears in 997 M41 as the leader of the Zeist campaign. This was a response to the Tau Empire's third sphere of expansion, which had been gaining ground almost unchecked due to threats elsewhere. The Ultramarines started the campaign alone, but would later be joined by elements of 9 other chapters, including the Silver Skulls and the Crimson Fists. Such was the eventual scale of the Imperial offensive that the Tau simply could not hold. The Ultramarines probably take most of the credit for stopping their expansion, but it was their combined attack on the staging planet Augura that finally forced the Tau to retreat. However, the victory was perhaps a little hollow, as though Zeist was retaken, Augura lay in ruins, and the Third Sphere was able to make gains elsewhere against the vulnerable regions of the Imperium. Following Zeist, Sicarius would be called to get vengeance for his defeat on Damnos, as the High Lords of Terra themselves demanded the Ultramarines reclaim the planet. He would not do it alone, however, as Chapter Master Marnius Calgar brought more than half the chapter to bear on the Necrons, despite reservations about their power. Though the Ultramarines, along with Astra Militarum and Deathwatch forces, were able to make planetfall and progress, the presence of a transcendent Catan and the hyper-intelligent strategies of the Necrons almost certainly gave them the upper hand. This forced Calgar to try a desperate but ultimately successful stratagem, basically tipping over a Gauss pylon to destroy the Tesseract Vault and unleash the Catan. This took the Necron Lord out of the game, as the Catan turned on him first and the Deathwatch blew up his revivification chamber, but it would fall to Sicarius to finally carry the day. After defeating a Lord infected with the Flayer virus, Sicarius drew a vortex grenade gifted to him by a Deathwatch sergeant who may have been an old squad mate, and threw it at the unleashed Catan. By luck or by skill, it worked exactly as hoped, and the Catan was sucked into the warp. Bereft of their main powerhouse and the command of the Undying, the Xenos were basically done from this point, and over several days the Necrons were destroyed and their tombs along with them. Damnos was returned to the Imperial fold, with some of the people evacuated by Sicarius and Sicarius a quarter century earlier forming part of the colonists, and the stain on the Suzerains and the chapter's honour were wiped away and avenged. We are unsure if Sicarius went back on campaign between the reclamation of Damnos and the event of the Gathering Storm, having been called back to defend Ultramar from an invasion by Umkar and the Iron Warriors that finally saw the Demon Prince killed by Calgar. Even if he had time for a quick campaign in between, he was certainly on Macragge when the refugees of Cadia were guided to the world by Yvraine and her Ynnari. He was assumed to have met with her alongside the other senior officers of the Ultramarines when she proposed resurrecting the Primarch Roboute Guilliman, and then held the line against the Black Legion invasion, trying to stop it from happening. Once Yvraine and Belisarius Cawl had succeeded in their work and Guilliman returned, Sicarius was at the Primarch's side as Ultramar was swept clean of chaotic forces. The second captain was also part of the Terran Crusade, as Guilliman attempted to travel to the cradle of humanity, but it was far from an easy trip. After being pulled into the maelstrom by the actions of Magnus the Red, the Terran Crusade wandered the warp for an unknown time, fighting demonic forces and the armies of the piratical Red Corsairs, with Sicarius winning renown in the siege of a notable traitor fortress city. He managed to survive capture by the Corsairs and Fate Weaver, and the escape orchestrated by Harlequin Silandri Veilwalker and Cypher's Fallen Angels, both of which are no small feats in themselves. And thus he was also present for the Battle of Luna as Guilliman and Magnus finally squared off. It took the aid of the Sisters of Silence and others coming from Terra to bail them out this time, and once they reached the cradle of humanity, Sicarius stood guard alongside the rest of Guilliman's guardians as the Primarch met the Emperor in the Imperial Palace. Once the former Lord Commander of the Imperium had reclaimed his old title, he dispatched Sicarius and others to check in on Ultramar as the Cicatrix Maledictum had recently appeared. Unfortunately, this mission was a failure, as the fleet became lost in the warp seemingly as the Astronomicon suffered its blackout in the Noctis Aeterna. Sicarius was officially listed as missing by the Ultramarines, and one of his senior officers, Akaran, would lead the Second Company as its captain during the Plague Wars in Ultramar. And yet, despite no explanation as to how or why at this time, Cato Sicarius not only survived, but returned. He became part of the Indomitus Crusade under Guilliman, though exactly when he did so is unknown, and he was present on Baal to greet the grievously wounded Commander Dante, and then awkwardly point him to Guilliman once the severity of his injuries became clear. Assumedly restored to Guilliman's guard, Sicarius is currently yet to retake his position as Second Company captain, despite his official reunion with the chapter. Whether this will remain the case either because of Sicarius himself or another person's choice, the Suzerain of Ultramar will likely be alongside his Primarch for much of what lies ahead. To conclude, let us look at the war gear and personality of Cato Sicarius. Sicarius is armed with a weapon named after his homeworld and the storms upon it, known as the Talisarian Tempest Blade. This power sword was forged on Talisar from adamantium, and whilst it is undoubtedly deadly in any hands, it is lethal in the grip of Sicarius. His training since youth, both on Talassar and with the Ultramarines, has made him a perhaps near peerless swordsman, and he is renowned for his coup de grace attack that can kill an enemy in a single blow. He also wields a plasma pistol that is supposedly Artificer crafted, though we do not believe it has much of a storied history in battle. Neither does the Tempest Blade, to be fair though. We have no history of a previous wielder, a previous battle, any dates, or anything like that. Sicarius' armour is an interesting thing, a suit of Artificer armour known as the Mantle of the Suzerain. Assumedly, this armour has been passed down the ranks of the Suzerains of Ultramar, but it may be a second company relic as well, given the left shoulder guard which incorporates the iron halo that marks Sicarius as a captain. This guard is actually from the Mark II pattern armour of the legendary Aural, a captain of the Second Company who won great fame in the period after the Horus Heresy on the Eastern Fringe. Other elements of the armour are also from Aural's suit, and Sicarius has broadly adopted the heraldry on it as his own. So whether the Second Company or the Suzerains truly hold claim on it is a question that may only be finally answered after Sicarius dies or someone else takes his job. There are still things on the mantle that are unique to Sicarius. The golden Aquila, symbolising his title as Grand Duke of Talassar, being the main one, and the Valor Crest on his helm, awarded as a symbol of bravery that was borderline suicidal during a battle at Fort Telendrar sometime after he earned a captaincy. As concerns personality, Sicarius can be best described as a pragmatic warrior with a grim streak and a fair pinch of zealotry. He is described as being brash, loud even, but it is said that he smiled for the first time in years when he heard of the planned retribution on Damnos, so he certainly isn't all outgoing, loud, smiley type. In his role as Master of the Watch, a secondary duty of the Second Company captain, Sicarius is responsible for dealing with infractions within the chapter. His approach is as zealous to this as it is on the battlefield, often shaking even hardened individuals who are called to tribunal, and his reputation has slashed the rate of appeals for trial by combat to a level not seen for over 3 millennia. In fact, Roboute Guilliman perhaps summed Sicarius up best in making an analogy between him and a legendary Ultramarine of yesteryear, Aenid Thiel. For those who don't know that name, Thiel won renown during the Battle for Calth with his unorthodox thinking but had a rather stubborn streak, something that Guilliman sees in Sicarius too. Whilst already a great and storied warrior, Sicarius' grasp of diplomacy and statesmanship are somewhat behind, and so the Lord Commander took the captain under his wing to try and train him in the arts of leadership. This action, whilst interesting in itself, becomes fascinating when you consider the rumours around the line of succession in the Ultramarines, and even more so when you consider the relationship between Guilliman and Marneus Calgar. There have been whispers for a long time, well perhaps more than just whispers, suggesting that Sicarius is set to inherit the post of Chapter Master from Calgar when the time comes. Given that Sicarius is not officially set to inherit, that role is officially assigned to First Captain Agaman, it must create some interesting dynamics even if Calgar and Agaman have not made comment on the matter to my knowledge. If you add in Guilliman's mentorship of the Suzerain, the chance of Sicarius jumping the queue only goes up, but there's another layer to it. We have detailed before in this series of logs that Guilliman and Calgar have a somewhat frosty relationship. Guilliman also knows he's not immortal, he's died once already after all, and there may come a day where the Imperium will need a new Lord Commander because the Primarch has bit the dust. Given there are no other Primarchs around at the moment, either missing or dead, it may be legacy planning at this point, so setting up Sicarius as a successor might be his way of spiting Calgar, who he has shown he has little faith in anyway. So who knows? Maybe Cato Sicarius one day will rule the entire Imperium. He'll almost certainly end up as Chapter Master of the Ultramarines if nothing else, assuming he isn't kept out of that role to remain at Guilliman's side. But whatever happens to him, I would say he's got a bright future ahead of him beyond it's on the battlefield. So ends the tale of Cato Sicarius. From noble birth on Talassar to a place at the side of a Primarch, one can certainly say that Sicarius has lived a damn good life to this point. It's been a life fraught with danger, most notably getting lost in the warp, but the High Suzerain of Ultramar has come through and won much respect and renown in the process. Now seemingly the protege of Roboute Guilliman, his star may still be rising all the way to the top, but that is a story that remains as yet untold. I hope you've enjoyed this latest edition of Champions of Humanity, looking at the greatest Astartes of the modern era. Now we must move on, but I think I want to take the time for a trip back to more familiar territory. Everything has changed across the galaxy since the appearance of the Cicatrix Maledictum, but there's one group who have especially managed to progress through the chaos and establish a new frontier for their territory. Big things have happened, and I wish to explore as much as I can. For now though, thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.